Welcome to Ecclesia Principles, a biblical strategy for believers to engage in God's design for government with Ray Eppard.
Glad you could join us again today. This week we've been looking at understanding justice and equality on a societal scale. That is a key ecclesia principle, a key thing when it comes to understanding how God wants us to look at and practice governing. It's a key thing. We have to understand justice and we have to understand equality on a societal scale. With this, we saw that there has to be an objective truth. God has to be a part of it. Without Him, there is really no justice and there is really no equality. It's just not going to happen because ultimately we're all partial. And there has to be a standard that we're holding to that lifts us up from our own sin nature, if you would. Now, with this, we've seen that justice is ultimately about outcomes, and that the outcomes should match the inputs. That the inputs, if a number of people have put input into it, then those outputs should correspond according to their inputs. What they have done. If one worked 8 days, 8 hours, and another worked 6 hours, justice is where those things come out accordingly. Now, equality has to do with the process and objectives. Ultimately, it's the baseline is about the process, and that the process does not show partiality. But with that, processes have objectives. There are objectives to processes. God has objectives. When it comes to a society, and again, it's easier to understand justice and equality on a small individual or situational level. But if we're going to understand how God views government, we've got to see it on a much larger picture, because this world is not just 2-3 people. There are billions of people here, and not all people are the same. Not all people have the same values. And so with this, we have to understand these things on a wider scale. And as Paul put it, no one lives to himself and no one dies to himself. The things that all of us do affect others. It particularly affects our descendants. I mean, the bottom line is, even people that don't have kids, that are going to have kids, their choices and decisions before they have kids still affect their children. It still affects them. We do not live or die to ourselves. And so and we're starting to move from those, the basic understandings, because if we're going to understand equality, God's perspective on equality, then we've got to understand God's objectives. What is He wanting the process to accomplish? And because the thing of it is, if you show no partiality in it, but you're not achieving the objective, then you really have left and departed from equality. Now, again, these are things that we're going to have to start thinking about, because we don't think in these terms that frequently. But I want us to begin to see some of this. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 25. Leviticus 25, and we'll read verses 14 and 15. Now, in this particular passage, God is talking to Israel and laying down some of the guidelines and the rules for the year of Jubilee. Now, this passage that we're getting ready to read actually deals with some of the objectives. Now, verse 14, it says, again, talking about if a person basically during the years between Jubilees, if they get into financial straits or whatever and they end up selling their property. It says, if you sell anything to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor's hand. You shall not oppress one another. Here's the objective. You shall not oppress one another. You shall not oppress one another. See, equality cannot exist where there's oppression. Let me say that again. Equality cannot exist where there's oppression. Oppression has to be eliminated if you're going to have equality. See, under a dictatorship, where let's take the children of Israel in Egypt. They were slaves. They were oppressed. There's no equality in that. The processes, one Israelite might receive the same thing as an Egyptian for something. But the bottom line is, if both of them committed murder, they may receive the same punishment. But the bottom line is the fact that one is oppressed and the other isn't, there's no equality there. And that doesn't always come by their choices, because again, with the Israelites, many of them were born into that. They were born into that oppression. He says, you shall not oppress one another. Verse 15. According to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall buy from your neighbor, and according to the number of years of crops, he shall sell to you. In other words, there was a basis that would keep equality in there so that, again, oppression would not take place. See, a lot of what is happening now, particularly in our country currently, there are companies right now, and I'm not opposed in general to just big business. I'm not opposed to it. We're a big country, this is a big world, and it requires big businesses. But there comes a point in time where big can become oppressive. And the objective isn't to eliminate big, the objective is to eliminate oppression. Because again, you can have big and have justice and have equality. But when big begins to use its size, begins to throw its weight around, and then begins to oppress, even if, quote, everyone is treated the same based on certain things, the objective of equality is the removal of oppression. And at that point, what you have, let me use this in a little bit clearer way. Let's take capitalism. I believe in capitalism. If you would, from that standpoint, I would consider myself a capitalist. Now, at the same time, I do believe that the primary economic system of the Bible is a capitalist system. Now, it is not pure capitalism. Pure capitalism is when it is purely you reap what you sow. You reap what you sow. And you make it or you lose it. You increase or you decrease. And you take risks, it works out. You take risks and it doesn't work out. And the thing of it is, under pure capitalism, it will eventually lead to a place where the advantage becomes so great for big, for the big corporations, for the big money, for the powerful. The advantages become so great because of size that it is easy to oppress. See, the bottom line, let's put it this way. Let's take a box store versus a mom and pop. The bottom line is a major corporation like that could just decide in, in one particular area. Now, they wouldn't do this, but sometimes they do things very close to it. That, hey, for the next 6 months, nothing in our store is over $1. It's all yours. Well, the bottom line is they have the ability, because of their size, to do that. They have the resources. The bottom line is the mom and pops down the road, in 6 months, they're probably going to be out of business because they can't compete with that, and they will end up having to shut their doors because the big could just outlast them. It's not about a competitive marketplace. At that point, it's about manipulating the prices to oppress and to push out. And God told them, you shall not oppress one another. See, that is an objective of equality that has to be factored in. Well, you could say, well, everything's equal. That's what they're asking to pay, and they're having to live with it, and you're asking people to pay this, and you're going to have to live with what you're asking for. It's equal for this. It's equal for each other. People make a choice. They make a decision. Yes, but the whole process at that point is designed to oppress. It is not designed to eliminate partiality. It is designed to eliminate competition. There's where we come into, laws about monopolies and different things like that. And there are some things now there are a few companies now that I think either should be broken up or should be considered a monopoly in what they're doing, because their size is beginning to allow them to function in oppressive ways. Particularly when you get into social media things right now, we have companies that are so big that because of their size, they kind of set the rules. Well, when you're setting the rules because of your size, that's a form of oppression. That's a form of oppression. Equality, the baseline is no partiality. Understand what I'm saying here. We talked about this yesterday. The baseline of equality is when there is no partiality. But the objective of equality is for no one to be oppressed. For no one to be oppressed. You see, right now, and we'll get into more of this because we will begin to discuss some things about economics and what God says about that. But you see, a lot of the way things are set up right now, economically, particularly credit cards, those things are designed ultimately to be oppressive, to hurt people. I mean, if you would, that's not what they're doing, but there's nothing keeping them from doing that. There's nothing keeping them from doing it. There's very, very little to offset that. And so the credit is so easy to get, but yet the interest rates are exorbitant. There has to be an idea, a concept. When it comes to equality, the objective of equality is to eliminate oppression. God bless you. See you next week.